I don't see any scenario in the next years where being in a big urban area is going to be of any advantage to anyone. People in cities have zero essential skills. Think about that. They don't know anything about surviving whatsoever. You might have noticed that I haven't talked much about politics lately. Not much at all, actually. And there's a reason for this. I've been going more into observer mode, looking at what is going on, what is happening all over the place, all over the world. And I don't think politics, the way that we thought of it before, exists any longer. I don't even think that governments, at least the way that people perceive them to exist any longer. If you really take a bird's eye view, and I've gone back like into the mid 20th century, and I think more or less, in ever intensifying and increasing stages, the certain circles within governments, backgrounds of governments, sort of what they call the deep state, have been preparing for a massive shift event that I think they believe will happen between now, perhaps the end of this decade, 2030, maybe a little later. There's various calculations, and obviously people out there who talk about cyclical events, who talk about resets and all that. But look at just the programs that have been run. The Cold War program, the war on drugs, the war on terrorism, and everything that's happening now. Incredible increases in defense budgets, right? We're now officially at $1 trillion per year. But really, with all these emergencies and all these projects going on, it gives so much opportunity to classify spending and to have the attention of the people focused on, it's either the border, it's the war on terrorism, it's the war on drugs, it's the war against this or that. And meanwhile, they've been building up and preparing the infrastructure to first survive whatever they think the event will be, whether it's geophysical, whether it's a solar event, whether it's something else, and then to have a new, completely different infrastructure in place. So I think everything that we're seeing now is not for the people who are around now. I don't think it's for, the changes in finance, the changes in international relations, the rise of, the Eastern powers, all of that. I don't think we're actually seeing this play out for our time. It's for after. Everything is being prepared for after. And I think people really need to reclaim their minds and their hearts to realize that whatever they thought was normal, whatever they thought life would be, how it was going to play out, everything that they were promised, everything that was sort of programmed into people, this is all gone. And the last time period that we've experienced some sense of normalcy, even though it was crazy already, was 2019. Everything after including 2020, normalcy is gone, and we won't see any normalcy. That's why things, when you look in the world, look so strange. That's why so much contradiction is happening. That's why when you listen to a lot of leaders in government position, they'll contradict themselves constantly. They even appear as different people. Like, you can't tell me that if you watch one single world leader day in, day out, make statements, appear in certain places, that you don't see that this is like different people. Even down to, they completely contradict themselves from one day to another. And yes, this is part of a psychological operation, but we have to consider bigger implications here. And everything that you think is being done for the good of the people, and some people still believe that, within those positions, this is just an infighting for whoever will be in charge once this event. They're positioning themselves so that leadership of the world, of the new order, will be in place for after. And so everything we see is about positioning for after, not for this current timeline. So what does this mean for the everyday person? Well, simply that you have to take full responsibility for your own lives. I don't know how many people will either survive this or not be hugely affected by it. Over the years and decades, we've heard many people claim to know what safe places would be in the world. Higher altitudes is pretty much a standard. And of course, you want to be away from densely populated areas, because anything from violence to civil war to disease would happen in densely populated areas, So you want to be a little more secluded. You want to have your communities in place. And this is not to say fear this. Because listen, if this is a cyclical geophysical event, if this is something that happens every, between 138 to thousands of years, depending on who you listen to, if this happens every so many years, maybe there's nothing we can do about that. Maybe there's simply nothing we can change about that. Maybe there is. I don't know. So fear is not what I'm advocating for. But in any event, to create a life that is your own, where you have the freedom over your decisions, where you have sovereignty over them. And if you still are of the opinion that you are a victim and that there's nothing you can do, and that you are at the mercy of whoever runs the show, whoever's in power, well, then that's your belief system, and who am I to argue with that? I won't try to convince you. This is for those who already know, who already feel, who might still be in doubt. I don't see any scenario in the next years where being in a big urban area is going to be of any advantage to anyone. People in cities have zero essential skills. Think about that. They don't know anything about surviving whatsoever. As a matter of fact, people in cities have zero essential skills, period, not just survival. The world doesn't need city people. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. Because all that city people can do is run cities. And cities are the dawn of civilization. They're the sunset of civilization, never the sunrise. Cities are where things go to die. That's just the way it is. Whether we like that or not is a different question. But and so being close to people that have zero skills are more prone to be neurotic, are more prone to psychosis, are more prone to bipolarism and all those things. Not that they don't exist outside of the cities, but they do exist in much, much bigger numbers inside of cities. There is no advantage in being in a densely populated area. Zero. So, if ever there was a question on where you would thrive the best, where, at least in my opinion, life will be more pleasant, more joyous, think about where that would be for you. And it's probably somewhere closer to the country, mountains, some more natural space. And then, like I said, it's not about fear, it's about reclaiming our power on all levels. Because I do think that we are at the beginning of a massive exponential true inner awakening. What we've seen so far is very largely awakening to outside things and events, fake history, politics, all of that. But the really exciting part is only just beginning, is where people are waking up to who they truly are and their capabilities. The telepathy coming back, the remote healing coming back, our ability to sense and intuit much deeper, a much greater co-creator power. Those things are actually coming back. And that is where the biggest excitement is, really. And we can't do that when we are sort of exposed to totalitarianism, which is on the rise everywhere. Every country in the world is getting more totalitarian by the day, and it's a program, right? This is the end of empires. This is how it always goes. The closer we get to the end of an empire, and we are at the end of the empires, the more totalitarian the leadership. It's authoritarian. That's just how it goes. It's what David Icke called the totalitarian tiptoe. So there's no escaping this in a sense of, oh, I'm going to a different country and it's not going to happen there. That's not reasonable, because it is happening. But within where you are, you can move away from where the dense population areas are and find your tribe, find your crowd, find your community, and just build regenerative, self-sustainable structures over time, one day at a time, one step at a time. This is where we can have real power. We might have a few more years, but I don't think quite that many before it happens.
They said China will catch a cold, and after that, then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. And you've got this totalitarian military lockdown in all the governments in the Western worlds, because everyone's going to be in panic about all of this. And then, he said, then the real war starts. Something that would be justifiably called the Third World War, with a much more major nuclear exchange. They believe that there is going to be what he called a geophysical event, a major geophysical event. There have been trillions of dollars that have been spent on deep underground bases for some reason, which we don't know why it is. That there are repeated cyclical geophysical events about every 11,500 years.
There's certainly something going to happen in 2027, and I don't know what it is.
Okay.
I've also heard 2034, and I've also heard other dates, much later. Some people say it's a pole reversal, some people say it's an asteroid hitting the planet, some people say it's AI reaching quantum, and then all of a sudden we lose the capacity to have control of our own computer systems. What I am aware of is that everybody's telling me we're on borrowed time. And I cannot begin to emphasize how serious a look I get when I say to people who are confiding in me, what's the timescale on this? And they're urging me to be urgent. They're saying to me, people need the right to know this. They have a right to know this. And I'm going, well, what are we talking about? And I feel like shaking these people and saying, for God's sake, just bloody tell me. And they are all constrained by their national security oaths. They want the public to know this.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do.
I don't think we're going to be in any shape in a decade to be doing very much of anything, so I'm not hopeful for the future direction that we're moving in. Climate-wise and geopolitical-wise, that's the thing I think is going to kind of come. I think things are going to be pretty difficult starting in a few years. And from what I've been told by sources, can't say specifically, I don't know that much yet, and I can't really say, but just that a lot of what we take for granted now in life, I don't think is going to be, we're not going to have it. A lot of things we have now that makes our lives as wonderful as they are.
The largest amount that went missing in any year was in 2015, 6.5 trillion. Literally, the way some of us describe it is it was enough money to fund a separate civilization. Essentially people saying we can't operate within this democratic machinery. We have to fund and build a secret infrastructure outside the government. So we called it the breakaway civilization. And literally, you funded a very significant infrastructure. And I spent 2 years with one of the best researchers I know, and we tried to estimate how many underground bases there were just in the United States alone and in the oceans immediately outside of the United States. We estimated 170. And that, of course, is the platform for all sorts of activities that you want to keep secret, including some of the things you may or may not be doing in space.